Hi Casper, welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thanks, Grace, for having me.
Honestly, a lot of guests actually recommended you because obviously you're like the security expert. And then yesterday, I was like binging through the podcast, and maybe we'll start with like your, the first of all, I also want to say like security recently has becoming like very popular. And then I was just catching up with the founder of Craigslist, and then I told him I'm doing a live with you like right now, and then he quickly said hi. So, but anyway, so let's talk about like what in maybe like your backstory. So obviously you were a founder yourself at some point, and you went to Berkeley, and then at some point you did IPO for another company, and then or like just like I guess investment banking for another company. Why don't we talk about like what were some early lessons that you've learned before you jumped into venture with Sapphire?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for the kind words, Grace. I would say certainly paid all your guests to say good things about me. But I joined Sapphire, not right after college, but I was doing investment banking and I was on IPO team of a company called MuleSoft. That's a pretty big Sapphire position. And MuleSoft went IPO and it was acquired by Salesforce for 6.5 billion. Now it's a 1 or $2 billion AR business within Salesforce. But I mean, I guess the takeaway from the prior to venture side of things, my personal learnings is that one, I was a CS minor back in college, so the ability to kind of understand technology from a high level framework perspective certainly helps me quite a bit in venture because we're really not the founders, whether it's CTO, CEO, so we're not really in it to help you build a product or anything like that. But having a good understanding of where the puck is going helps me a lot to a lot of extent. And then secondly, I would say, to your point about, I started a little business back in college, raised a little bit of venture money. It didn't really go anywhere, to be frank, from a outcome perspective. But I think one thing I learned is really just, it's pretty hard to be a founder. And that's probably, some of the empathy I have, that's where it came from. So I think that resonates well with founders I work with as well.
I wonder, so like why, I guess like security, and obviously I feel like you have invested in a lot of like really cool AI company like Glean, like Weights and Biases, and like MoveWorks, which was a big acquisition last week. And then why don't we start with like, I guess like in your mental roadmap, what are things that you're interested in? And then we could dive into your blogs. I downloaded a few pictures from a year ago blog, but let's start with like why, I guess like you pick this sector, and then what are some like main observations?
Yeah, I would say, as much as there's natural interest, and I do think security is a very mission driven sector where, you know, in my humble opinion, it's sort of, you're obviously creating real enterprise value, but also doing good to the world to some extent. I really think there's this, at the growth stage, right, where I invest in, you have to look at company traction, you have to look at market tailwinds, and cybersecurity is a pretty evergreen category by itself, right? I would probably break it down to a couple of things. One is from a talent shortage perspective, there's just not enough folks who are focusing on cybersecurity from a human perspective in general. And I think the easiest way to think about this is folks who are, going to college for a computer science major, they're thinking about building the next LinkedIn, Google, right? They're not really thinking about going to cybersecurity. So you always have this shortage problem. So how do we have vendors, startups that are coming in to fill out that shortage side of things, use product to really help human triage and counteract those cybersecurity threats better? So I think there's that component to it. Secondly, I think, from a attack surface perspective, so, you talk about AI, but, just 3, 4, 5 years ago, there's cloud, right? We saw Wiz, which is a pretty young company, right? In all the grand scheme things, started 5 years ago, and now was acquired for 33 billion by Google. There's always a new thing on a block, and while that gives rise to a lot of opportunities to build new companies, there's also new threats, right? You have to counteract with, whether it's mobile when it first came out, or cloud, and now obviously with AI, there's a lot of threats related to AI that we can get into and talk about. So those are, I would say, like generally the major tailwinds behind the sector, and why it's relatively evergreen, and it's great for an investor like myself to spend time in, beyond just my natural, intrinsic interest. And then also the other thing that I really, look for is not necessarily sort of a strong technological differentiation, but I really care about sort of, a strong emphasis on the product side of things, right? I think cyber is one area where, for better or worse, because it's less understood. End user like you and me, it's hard to touch, right? Like Cyera's security product, it's hard to know what exactly it is. So I think the end users and the end buyers of those products higher bar for quality of cybersecurity products. So that actually gives you more room for differentiation, which is why I tend to spend a bunch of my time in cyber, but I do spend other times, right, in other infra sectors like DevOps, data, AI, and whatnot.
So I wonder, I'm literally taking notes. So I heard, okay, so like, I mean, I hear like, okay, so first of all, like, let's talk about like the security founder. So I guess like how do you think about like, where does like the best security founders actually come from? Are they from like another security company that have a big exit, but they're just not the CEO? Or like, or like on the other hand, like right now, I feel like voice security is such a big domain. Like every other day you see like there's like 5 other people started creating these like cyber secure or like voice security startups that are like voice recognition to make sure that your mom is your mom instead of like AI. So but like those are the people who are, like recent graduates, or let's say like they work at an irrelevant company for like 3 years, or like worked in crypto or some stuff. Like, it's kind of adjacently relevant because it needs like I guess like certain type of like blockchain technology, or like other I guess technology that to verify your identity. But I guess like, where does a top founder actually come from in terms of security companies?
Yeah, I would say, it's not a cop out. First of all, great question, but it's not a cop out answer. I would say like there's many, many ways to Rome, right? There's many ways to victory. I think, first of all, I think like when you think about a type of founders that would succeed in cyber, a key component to remember is cybersecurity is a very low velocity sector, right? So, the way I think about this is we are on this new streaming, software thing, but if this streaming session has bugs or doesn't go well, you can just switch to something else. Or you have a new AI, email tool, right? You like it, great, you stick to it. But if you don't like it, you can switch right away. Cyber, the velocity is a little slower, right? Yeah. The idea is if it doesn't break, you just keep it to some extent. So, so generally, it's just a lower velocity sector, and so there's certainly a playbook, right, in software where you have a proven founder who's done this before, and you just back them, and that works really well in cyber as well. Which is you have the domain expertise, you have experience at a bigger company, you experience some frustration, you leave and start a new company, and those have great founders that kind of came out as cybersecurity, right? If you look at George Kurtz at CrowdStrike, he had background in endpoint security, way before this as well. On the other hand of things, right, I'll just talk about like, your Tom at Cyera or Saf at Wiz. They started some companies, they have like some experience in cybersecurity, but it's not like, they have like 25 years of experience in cybersecurity. I think the reason why is going back to my point about this sector's lower velocity is that there's so many lessons you learn from a lower velocity sector of how things are working today. But the bigger disruption, the bigger outcome sometimes comes from the fact that you have a beginner's mindset. You're approaching this problem without knowing better, right? Because sometimes a CISO would tell you, this is how things work. And if you just build whatever they want you to build, exactly carbon copy, you will move at the speed as the broader sector, which is like we talk about generally low velocity. But you are able to kind of show up with a beginner's mindset, and whether it's through some go-to-market innovation or product innovation, where you're able to kind of show up with something that's a little deeper, right, a little different. I backed Kyle at Huntress, who's going to do cybersecurity for SMBs, right? And that's not a sector that people think could make money at all, right? traditional wisdom is, hey, you can't make money by selling cybersecurity to SMBs because SMBs didn't care about cybersecurity. And
Mhm.
lo and behold, 3, 4, 5 years later, SMBs do care a lot about cybersecurity, and now people care a lot about that. So, in some ways, I do think this is a sector where having a beginner's mindset is important, right? This is not to say that experience is not important. Experience is always important, very valuable, but this is a specific sector where because the velocity of movement is so low that sometimes not knowing better, not knowing what's actually going on, actually benefit you as a founder. So that's what I'm looking for, right? Which is, hey, I want to partner with people who's experienced the frustration before, who's an experienced operator, who has a new angle to the problem. But also, I'm pretty open-minded with folks who, quote unquote, haven't done this at a big company before, because, in general, cyber is a lower velocity sector.
Mm. I wonder, so why is it low velocity again? Is that just like, I guess also like how is AI gonna help improve or not improve this? Because I feel like with AI, the demand of cybersecurity is probably a lot higher than the past. But yeah, like we'd love to have your take on like why is it low velocity?
Yeah, I think one is just it's less understood, right? Like, we talk about, you've seen the news, say board directors care a lot about cybersecurity, but like,
Mhm.
how much do they really know about, what exactly is, attack surface management? It's hard to ask people to take courses on what cybersecurity
Mhm.
is. And in general, people have good intuition, right, about sales and marketing
Mhm.
software, about
Mhm.
streaming software, right? You can
Mhm.
picture yourself in it. Cyber, it's a little hard to understood, right? So the barriers to entry is a little higher from a knowledge perspective,
Mhm.
which is why, you know, this idea of like, hey, if it doesn't break, I wouldn't switch it, right? It's like, hey,
Mhm.
if you have an auto insurance provider, who knows how good they are when you get into trouble, but you're not gonna, think about to replacing them when
Mhm.
nothing's happening, right? Versus a tool that you're interacting every day, right? Slack or
Mhm.
Teams, emails, right? Like if something doesn't work that well, you start thinking about, okay, can I try something else?
Mhm.
Which is why, like in general, this sector, is a lower velocity sector in the sense of, the winners of the sector is very sticky, right? Like
Mhm.
some of the names in application software, prior to, the Salesforce ServiceNow's era that are not relevant anymore, right? Like
Mhm.
PeopleSoft or something
Mhm.
like those are big names. Those have real revenue, right? But
Mhm.
if you look at cyber, like a lot of people are still using McAfee, Symantec, things
Mhm.
that were started 30 years ago or something like that. So
Mhm.
it's just really one of those mindsets of, hey, if it doesn't break, I don't really need to fix it, which is
Mhm.
why, again, it, we're going to see a lot more innovation, in my opinion, from AI. But I still think the traditional tool stack is just not going to be easily replaced, right? And
Mhm.
hopefully AI brings more velocity, brings more competition.
Mhm.
But unless you truly understand what is going on, right? It's
Mhm.
hard for you to be like, okay, I don't need this other tool anymore. Let me just rip this out. Because on the back of my mind, you're always thinking like, what happens if I rip this tool out that's been working for 5 years, or at least didn't give me any issues for 5 years, right? So,
Mhm.
um, so I think that's a pretty key contributor to the low velocity attribute of the sector.
I wonder, so like when you were thinking about um like the sales motion of the sector, like how is it being sold? From I guess like who is buying it? Is that the CISO of a company or like why would they buy it versus like build it on their own? And then what are something that like you felt like are since like you mentioned about like some of these like uh older generation company are like very sticky because like people think as long as it's not breaking, like we're not gonna implement new technology into this. Like, I guess for the newer startups, like how are they selling it into these like bigger players? Because I feel like it tends to be larger company that's more sticky to these like older solutions because of they're less likely to they want to stay safe. Maybe I'm wrong, but tell me more about like I guess like what does a buyer motion or seller motion kind of look like in the space?
Yeah, totally. I think why don't I answer the second part of your question first, which
Mhm.
is what do they do with all those older legacy solutions, right?
Mhm.
Oftentimes, the way I describe this is it's kind of a layer cake.
Mhm.
So you don't totally replace them, but you added something on top, and then you add something else on top, and then you add something else on top, right? That's kind of how it works. And then lo and behold, you have 9 different solutions solving, again, not the same problem exactly, but solving, slightly different problem. And there's a lot of overlaps in between, right? And that's pretty common in a organization, right? And which is why, when you see companies showing up, right? The newer companies in the enterprise sector of things, which is, the Weights Cyeras of the world, they don't show up and they're like, hey, throw away your CrowdStrike. They never say that. They would say, hey, here's a new thing. You know what? Parallel networks, which is great on the firewall side of things, doesn't do a great job at cloud security, doesn't do a great job at data security. Why don't you just use Palo for everything else, but use me for this part? So that's kind of the idea, that how people are able to come in, right? They're chipping in at first, right? Chipping from different angles at first, and over time becoming a real platform. Which we didn't talk about, because most cybersecurity companies don't make that jump from a wedge into a real platform because of this dynamic. But there are the ones that actually make the jump into a real platform is, again, it's just huge enterprise value compounders. So there's that component. From the traditional typical sales motion perspective on the enterprise side, right? We're talking about enterprise. It's very much tops down, CISO-led sort of motion. Sometimes the CISO have technical teams they want to get involved with. It really depends on, just like everything else, it depends on the personality, depends on the background of the CISO, right? Some CISOs, they love to buy big brand name, blue chip stuff where, you probably heard the phrase that you can't get fired for buying IBM. Obviously when IBM was still the top dog in the game, but very much buying. And there's CISOs, right? Especially the Silicon Valley types, where they're building a lot of solutions in-house, right? Because sometimes the scale they're seeing from a data usage user perspective, a lot of the cybersecurity vendors haven't even seen those kind of scale, right? We're talking about internet scaled companies like Stripe, and so there's a lot of built in-house for those. But in general, the go-to-market motion here is very much, think about the traditional enterprise wine and dine CISO sale. You got to build trust with them, do POCs, right? Because again, through our discussion, the leverage here is high, right? It's sort of, if I give you a new tool, a new version of email server, and it doesn't work, you just go back to Gmail or Outlook. But like if I do a cyber thing that protect, AI voice protection, and it didn't work, and 10% of our clients lost data because of this, it's a real issue. So wine and dine sale, longer sales cycle, you have a pretty longer proof of value kind of process. But the flip side of this is once you're in, once you've earned the trust of the team, you're pretty sticky and you can expand over time, right? So that's kind of the benefit of it. And what I try to do in my day job is try to get a good sense of how good they are at understanding what this motion looks like, right? Because you think about a wine and dine, longer sales motion, you can spend a lot of money doing this. And then on the other side of the equation, if the economics don't make sense, right? If you do all this and your contract is, 30,000 ACV, like that probably doesn't make any sense, right? You have to sell like bigger contracts, or the sales motion velocity had to be faster, right? So I think that's one of the things I actually spend a lot of time thinking about when I evaluate cybersecurity companies.
I wonder how, I guess, like you mentioned about, like, let's say, I guess, like, we could use any of your portfolio company or any other company as an example. I guess, like, how does one sell to like a big company? So like basically I've seen a lot of like earlier stage cybersecurity startup, they're trying to become design partner of these like banks and stuff, and then they would meet someone at the bank. I don't even know if that's like even the right person to meet. And then after they meet someone at the bank, and then they kind of like demonstrate this is like what they're building, and then let's say if they land them as a design partner slash like maybe they give them some feedback, but like how long does it going to translate into a paid pilot typically? And then from paid pilot, how long does it take for, let's say, my security startup to sell to, I don't know, JP Morgan?
Yeah, it's a really case by case thing. And I think, the example you use, JP Morgan, which I know the team there pretty well, that's probably the longest, right, segment that you can sell into.
Mhm.
And because part of their concern would be, hey, if I trust you, a 5% startup, first of all, there's a lot of boxes you can check through, right? From a governance perspective, from a data perspective.
Mhm.
But also in general, like what if this company goes under, right? That's a very big, big concern that folks would have.
Mhm.
But you can think of, again, it's hard for me to pick an
Mhm.
exact time frame of how long this will take, right?
Mhm.
In general, you would have a sales cycle where you have an initial discussion with either a CISO or a member of their team, and
Mhm.
hopefully this is their priority already versus,
Mhm.
hey, this is something that you have educated them on, right? Say, let's just use Cyera as an example, right? Which one of my companies, data security is a top of mind problem for me going to 2025. Okay, so then I would have a discussion with either the product team or the go-to-market team of Cyera, and then from there, you probably would want to start doing a POV, right? If there's mutual interest.
Mhm.
And on the startup side, frankly, like your goal is trying to push to that POV point as soon as possible, right? Like there's no point of delaying that. You want to get that as soon as possible. You want that to be a successful POV, which is why it's important to set up infrastructure around sales engineering, post sales, some of the pre-sales stuff that you really want to have the right infra set up, because
Mhm.
the testing environment that JPM asks you to adapt to versus the data store that Bank of America asks you to adapt to are completely different, two different things. So you really have to be nimble and have the personnel to kind of do those setups. But once the POV is in, it's about doing evaluation and understand the criteria of, what do the teams at JPM cares about, right? What are the key criteria that they would care about? And then once you kind of get to a certain point, they would need to make a case, right? So your job is to make it easier for them to make their case
Mhm.
to their bosses, right, about why this is a very critical tool, right? And sometimes, you have, certain initiatives that you can latch on, right? Like for example, AI right now is really hot. That's where all the CIOs want to spend money on. The
Mhm.
question is, they don't really know why, and they don't have a great sense of what tools to spend money on, right? And
Mhm.
in this Cyera data security example that we talked about, one of the things that's super interesting is, AI as an initiative, right? Because um, in order to do AI, like one of the pretty top of mind concerns is, hey, what if you leak your data into some agent that's third party, right? That happens all the
Mhm.
time, which is you would implement some sort of co-pilot,
Mhm.
and then the users get so much value, they started doing all kinds of searches and Googling within the organization, and they found things that they're not supposed to find. And then 3 days later, CISO's like, hold on, I can't make you do this. And so then the problem is the CEOs don't like that, because CEOs like, we want to show people AI, we want to show productivity. Why are you in the way, CISO? So for the CISOs, this is a very top of mind thing. And so if you can find a way on your go-to-market motion to
Mhm.
latch onto things like AI to accelerate your POV, that would be a very positive thing. But yeah, once you're proven out, then sign a PO, and then you go into post-sales implementation, and just go from there. That's kind of the idea.
Mm. Since you mentioned about like the CIOs are spending a lot of time and energy on like thinking about implementing AI, what does that entail? Like, so I'm sure like they would ask people like yourself or just like investors or like experts about like, hey, what are some like I guess cybersecurity coming that you're seeing, or maybe some of the CISOs will provide you with their perspective on like where they want to kind of like leverage AI. How do you digest and process these information? And I guess like what are some like insights there right now? Like, is there any particular AI thing that like they're spending more energy on?
It's a very unique point in time, Grace. I would say, like,
Mhm.
you think about the Chat GPT moment, right, which is November
Mhm.
22. We're not even 3 years into this,
Mhm.
and there's been so much energy, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's from the bigger incumbents, Microsoft, ServiceNow, Salesforce, to the newest startups, to venture ecosystem, to people in private equity, people in hedge funds. Like
Mhm.
everybody's talking about this as a super cycle. In
Mhm.
my opinion, the reality is like devil is always in the details, right? And
Mhm.
when I think about the step one
Mhm.
of a CIO or CISO organization, should be, how do we find a way to get value from artificial intelligence, right?
Mhm.
And that is actually the biggest issue with AI prior to ChatGPT, right? Which is demo looks great, but it's hard to get value from it, right? Like it's it takes a long time. Different departments come in to build a model and then to show value. Which again, this new paradigm, I think it's a lot faster time to value, but you still have to be thoughtful about what your use case is, right? It's not just, hey, let's give everybody and ChatGPT log in and people will be productive, which again, this is a way to be more productive because I use that all the time. I'm sure employees use that all the time and can get more productivity. But some of the more specific use case, you need to be thoughtful and you think about what are the substrains of things that you really need to focus on as an organization. So step one, in my opinion, is really instead of setting the scaffolding, think about what actually could be valuable. That's actually a really big focus of organizations, right? It's like, where is the ROI? And that's a pretty big focus for folks right now that I see. And then on the cyber side of things, right, which is how do we be an enabler, right, of you realizing value, but also provide a guardrail for you so you don't really go off the rails, go do whatever you want to do, right? Use user data to do something. Because one of the prerequisites of seeing value from AI, right, now that we're, again, 2.5 years in, which is some organization adopted, Microsoft Copilot, and they woke up, they realized, it's good, but it's not that good because, it doesn't really have a lot of the context of what I do, right? Like if I were a pharma company, doing drug discovery, I'm doing some document writing about a certain drug. Like if this Copilot doesn't have the information of what I'm doing, doesn't have the context, it's not that useful, right? It's like, it's almost like a better Google agent that gives me sometimes the right answer, sometimes the wrong answer. So how do you make sure that, organizations can leverage context in a safe way? That's a really big cyber problem. And I think that's a really big unlock for the organization to get value from AI because, the contextual information is a pretty big jump, right? And I think like if I were to tell you in all honesty, like if I see what's going on in the field, I think that part about giving the right context to the model and by the way, what kind of models, right? Like are we talking open source, self-hosted? We're talking about, one of the large providers like Anthropic, OpenAI, like that's still a little bit up in the air, right? So I would say, again, organizations are finding ways to sort of get to the point of a lot of ROI. I think we're still in the exploration phase of getting there. I see new data points on a monthly or sometimes weekly basis of how fast things have moved. But we're make no mistake about it, we're still very much in this kind of crawl, walk, run phase. We're still trying to get there. Is my sense when I talk to global 2000 CIOs and CISOs.
For sure. I wonder, so like I really like what you said about like the context piece. Is there any solution on that? Or like obviously I feel like in the security space, I feel like having context or like leveraging AI that understand your entire database is like very different than like, having like I guess like the ChatGPT equivalent of like a corporate really things. It's very different than like, security, because security is like a lot of the sensitive information will be shared, and obviously there's like just like a lot more um I guess like consequences than like, some of these other stuff. So I guess like is there any interesting solution that you're seeing in that space?
I would say like I just talking my own books. I'm super super high on Cyera on solving that. I think like I'll just boil it down to very specifics, right? Like what is a real problem that people are facing today, which is okay. You have a lot of files in a file system like Box or Dropbox, and you're like, I want to leverage, right? Let's say, Grace, you're a product manager, and you want to leverage some of the product related files, right? About I don't know the 10 products we rolled out last year, and with those 10 products, there are 5,000 files related to those 10 products, right? But the problem is within those 5,000 files, there's, let's say, 3,000 files that contain some sort of information that you can't really share with other people, right? You don't feel comfortable sharing with a third-party model. How do you take that information out? Or how do you sort of, do you have to go to 3,000 files and delete all the information? Or do you have to, is there a way to kind of mask that information, right? That's a very big problem because, when you actually multiply just you, the PM, to the entire organization, right? Like this is similar to me sending out 10,000 Slack messages to 10,000 employees and be like, everybody spend 5 hours a day, masking information before we pump those contexts into ChatGPT or into like some sort of model, right? So how do we solve that problem in a very easy and intuitive way, right? And by the way, I'm not claiming that's a solved problem. It's very, very hard thing to do, in my opinion, remediation. But that's where, again, one of my companies, Cyera, is going to. And that's in my opinion a very interesting vector, right? Because once you know where the sensitive information is, you actually got to find a way to actually solve it and address it. So that's a very, very interesting vector, and sort of where the puck's going a little bit.
Totally. Okay, so I want to switch gear a little bit on some of your articles. So let me just I present this slide. It's not like a slide, but it's on observability. Maybe this is I don't know if this is old for you, but this is from a year ago, but I still feel like it's a pretty good graph. Okay, where is it actually? No, I know where it is, but oh, okay, it cannot be shared. Wait, hold on. Let me just drag from my computer, upload file. Sorry, yesterday it has no problem. But
No worries.
Oh, never mind. Okay, it's not it's not like a web shareable thing. So it was on observability. I don't want to share screen because I'm I really
you probably have
I have certified Windows. I don't know what's gonna happen there.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. It's literally not okay. So it's the observability market landscape graph. Can we talk about what is observability? And then so obviously on this graph there's digital experience, and then there's synthetic internet, and then there's application performance monitoring. Maybe we could start with how do you come up with the graph, and then what are some stuff that you feel are interesting, and then does this still apply to today?
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to think about observability is think about a car, right? It's like your system, and when a system is running, it gives you all kinds of telemetry about what exactly is going on, right? Is there something off with your website, right? Which is very related to some of the digital experience stuff. Are things not working on the back end for Kubernetes monitoring, right? Which is more infrastructure monitoring. Are there things more pertaining to application monitoring, right? Which is other things. So it's almost like when you have a system running, when you have a car running, there's all kinds of telemetry, metrics, traces, logs that are getting created at the same time. So your goal is actually, find a way to efficiently retain those logs. In real time, if something was wrong, figure out what the problem is and resolve it. And then on the flip side, right, in the longer range things where you have to be able to look back, in a month or 2 months, if you're investigating some sort of incidents that happened, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, why suddenly we couldn't log into LinkedIn or Zoom, right? So that's kind of the broad idea. The way I kind of come up with this entire graph, and again, it's really hard in general to come up with, a graph that you can fit each logo into every single category, because the funny part is when I wrote out a blog, the most common thing I got from founders is oh, why am I categorized there? Or why am I not there, right? Some founders are I need to be in every bucket because I do everything. And it's a little harder. And again, a graph is always a simplification of my mental framework. So I kind of started with what they started with, right? What their initial focus area is, right? So for example, like logs, you think about Elastic, Splunk, or Sumo Logic. That's what they started with, right? That's where they first started their company with, and that's their classic product. Obviously, they've expanded over time into other things like APM, application monitoring, or infrastructure monitoring, or log analytics. But I kind of want to start with something where I don't need to put a data log across every single one of them, right? Or Grafana across every single one of the buckets.
I guess how does it make money for the observability space? And then why is it why do we obviously, I mean, I downloaded like 3 of your graphs. This is like one of them. And then you really use a lot of time on this. I guess how do you, I know that you sort of explain what it is about for example, logs is providing record of system activities, and then there's the metrics and stuff. But I guess why is it deserving a graph, and then how much money is it actually in this domain on its own, and then through these sub segment with all these different sectors, like the digital, the synthetic, the everything else, where do you think the money actually goes to in, I guess, later stage companies?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of money here. And I think the framework I would use is every system needs observability, right? It's like, oh, you build an application, you need a database, of course. Every system needs observability. So it's a pretty prevalent system, right? So you think about every single company that has some sort of digital properties need observability. And that's a pretty important thing, right? So if you are an AWS customer, if you are a GCP customer, if you are any sort of cloud customer, you need this, right? So I think that's one of the reasons that drive such a big observability budget is it's basically, everybody uses this. It's across the board. Everybody needs this. And secondly, I think a very interesting thing that people don't realize is, the way observability monetize is tied to your cloud spend, right? So if you spend $1 on, one of the 3 big clouds, a portion of that went into observability, right? It's like, again, going back to my car analogy, you bought this car subscription, and every month, partially, a portion of that went into observability. And the way those vendors justify this, whether it's through the data volume, right? Because you made a lot of telemetry, you need to store those, or whether it's through some sort of usage-based metrics. Generally, that translates to 25% of the cloud spend. And 25% cloud spend is a lot of spend, right? I would compare this sector with, say, developer tools, right? DevOps. In some ways, this is much more efficient to monetize versus a traditional DevOps model, because DevOps is a per seat model, right? You have X million of developers on Earth times how much you can charge per seat. This is a meter on your cloud spend over time. So it's, in some ways, people are used to this commercial norm of paying observability vendors as a portion of cloud spend. And that's a really good place to be in, because, this sector is sort of like the gift that's always giving. Like I was telling people that this is an evergreen sector to some extent, because it's just tied to how much you spend on compute. And if you ask me why that is the case, I mean, I have theories, but this is sort of the commercial norm, right? It's like, you buy developer tools, you want to pay per seat. You buy observability tools, you sort of think about them as a percentage of how much data they're monitoring and retaining for you. And, in translation, that's kind of a percentage of cloud spend. And your cloud spend usually is the biggest item in your IT budget, which is why this is such an attractive sector, in my opinion. Now, you had the other question of relatively speaking, which out of those sectors are more attractive than the others? I
have a question for you. So since some of our listeners are enthusiast, AI enthusiast, or let's say with less of technical background, can you quickly go through what does each one means using the car example?
again, like maybe not using car, because I can't come up with
Okay.
so many analogies after brakes or the windshield.
Okay.
Yeah, so like digital experience monitoring analytics, right? Like think about you go on, you know, ChatGPT, you perform a query. What if there's an error, right? I don't know if you ever get an error before. I've gotten errors before saying like, oh, the system is, has errors or
Down.
something. So,
Yeah.
so what is going on there? Or as a user, right? Like, we have a company called Pando. As a user, when I go on your website, what do I click on? Like, what do I do? Like, like where do I spend the most time? Where do I get stuck, right? So that's kind of the first bucket. Synthetic internet performance monitoring, those are more sort of, you have a website, right? Those are very website tied to a website, where you have a website, you have this many users visiting the website. What are the difference in terms of performance and in terms of sort of, degradation of different performance, right? Like if you are, the number 5,000th user visiting the website, like what exactly you're getting from a response speed perspective. I'm just using rough numbers. APM, application performance monitoring, like this is a very classic sort of, monitoring sector, which is monitoring your entire application, right? Like the way you think about an application is like, LinkedIn's application, Zoom is an application, but within each application, there's a lot of small applications, right? That's form the entire big application. So if your big application is not working, which one of the smaller applications, right? Like the website handler or the apps that you wrote, the small web app that you have within LinkedIn, like which one is the lone pole in terms of why the response speed is so low? So that's what application performance monitoring is telling you. ML model monitoring, LLM ops, that's, again, that's different way of thinking about this, which is your data engineer, data scientist, building ML tools, ML practitioners, building ML tools. How do you know if this is performant, right? How does my model compare to the benchmarks as I'm iterating through this, right? So that's that. Logs is more backend stuff of, an application, some sort of infrastructure property is getting, is sort of run, and what are my logs showing me from a speed and from sort of a delay perspective, right? Sometimes infra is a different set of metrics compared to log, right? This is like probably some of the metrics that are emitted from your properties, right? Whether it's a website or your application and whatnot, or your Kubernetes cluster, right? That's more backend. Network performance monitoring. This is like, sort of like if I think about a classic example of if you have your own home Wi-Fi and you installed SolarWinds for consumer, and suddenly your Wi-Fi is slow one day, like you can actually see why your Wi-Fi is slow. Like, are we dropping packets or not, right? CI/CD visibility, that's more tied to the developers, right? If I were a developer, I'm doing something like, am I compiling code? Is part of my code, put in the right place, right? Like how fast is it getting compiled and all that stuff. And then AI ops and incident response, right? That's part of the workflow, right? Something happened. How do I respond to this? And this is actually a very interesting part, because that's where AI's role in observability comes first, right? Because all these other categories, the data, you still need to collect it. It wasn't like now there's AI, you don't need to collect this anymore. In fact, with AI, you need to collect more of those telemetry, more of those metrics, traces, and logs, right, to some extent. But what AI actually plays in here is, can you help me, the human who's looking at all those graphs, triaging this, right? Meaning, can you help me figure out what the incident is? Can you help me manage, my dashboards better, right? Because today, what's going on is I buy all those tools. I'm looking at a dashboard of how this works, and based on my own personal experience, I'm either writing some scripts to automate some stuff, or I'm just responding in real time to it, right? So imagine the work that I do is made easier because of AI, so I can focus on long-term system health. That's actually a very interesting part, right? So this incident response is less so about data collection, it's less on the data side, but more on the response side of things. So sorry, I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer. I just went through all the buckets.
Oh no, I love that. What is the pipeline visualizations and the end of like the same security?
Yeah, so the pipeline side, this is less so on the data store. Right? Pipeline just, when you were collecting all this data, you need to collect from, website into my data store, right? There's a pipeline in between. And the way to visualize, the way to think about this is like, sometimes you don't want all the data in the world, right? Like imagine, again, going back to a car example, you have all kinds of stuff, right? Like, I don't know, you can collect information around the noises in my car at any given time. Like, is that relevant for the things I want to do? It's probably not. So how do you think about what info that you retain, what info you throw out? That's pretty important, right? Because there's the noise, signal to noise problem, but there's also a cost problem, right? If you collect all the data in the world, obviously it's great because you can always look back, but it's pretty costly over time. So that's what pipeline does, which is going from A to B, but also help you filter out things that you don't want, right? Visualization is a dashboard that you can put on top of those tools to help you visualize, like think about just a very simple dashboard of the downtime of a website, right? Like meaning how often is my website down? So that's how visualization works. And by the way, this sector, mostly vendors on the observability side, they show you a dashboard already, right? They come with a packet of dashboards. It's just usually an enterprise use so many different kinds of observability tools that you want a common dashboard to kind of show data from like 5 different data stores, right? So that's where visualization sort of comes from.
Okay, so you were about to talk about like how much like I guess people are spending on this. I like which, let's say, one category on this graph that you feel like are more exciting. I mean, obviously there's like your portfolio companies on multiple of these like companies on this graph, but like how do you think about where do people spend most amount of money and time?
Yeah, I think like, what I'm most excited about, I'd say like, I'm pretty excited about this entire sector in general, which is why I wrote a blog. And this is not to say where people would spend the most time, but I think like, again, we talk about AI, right? Like one of the ways AI actually helps human and helps human thinking about different types of incidents is it's almost like helping me with some of the cognitive tasks, right? Like again, to our point, if I get a call or SMS at 1 a.m., Pacific time about our users in, Singapore is experiencing delays. Okay, now I wake up. Today, my workflow would be I wake up, okay, I'm looking at all my dashboards and think about how do I, like, is there a line of code I can change? Is this some sort of issues? Should I turn off a feature to make my website smoother for those users, right? So I'm making those cognitive decisions real time. And oftentimes what happens is I saw a problem that I don't understand because I work on this part of the application. I don't work on the other part of the application. So I ping my teammates on the other team and I woke them up, right? If this is a really urgent issue, I have to wake them up. Or I just, send them a note and they address it tomorrow or something like that, right? But think about what happens if I wake up, okay? Still not ideal. I still need to wake up. But if I wake up and there's this AI incident response, AI ops thing that's telling me, okay, Casper, here are 3 potential reasons why your system is down, right? It's almost like, I don't know if you listened to Satya podcast recently, where Satya was saying he would like to wake up to email drafts that's written already, so he can just make edits right away, right? Like, wouldn't it be nice if the engineers wake up to 3 solutions? Again, look, who knows, right? Maybe those 3 are not perfect. Maybe they're just 95, 96, 97 perfect, but humans are not perfect either, right? So, if I were a human, I wake up at 1 a.m., what are the chances that I will get to the right solution right away, right? For a very complex task. It's probably not as good as AI, right? In some cases. So how do you kind of get the exact solutions to the human? I think that's a pretty interesting value prop, which is why I think like we're going to see a lot of interesting AI, SRE, AI ops innovation with AI coming along, right? And the way, to worry about like how much money there is, I think like if they can do a really good job at that, it's more of a headcount cost thinking, right? Which is, hey, in order to get to this kind of efficacy, I would have needed to hire 5 people. And you do the math of 5 people, 5 Bay Area engineers. And like, what's the proportion of savings I can have by using an AI tool? So that's a sector I'm pretty excited about. Yeah.
I wonder. So so that's like the AI ops response segment.
Yeah. So again, to your point, prior to the current AI regime, right? There's AI already, but they're doing things that are, it's just a different. Imagine like you're using a different email writer before ChatGPT came out, right? It's the efficacy are quite different, right? This is potentially helping you with 20% of the tasks. I'm saying with AI and better models and better application building, hopefully they could help you with 80% of what you do. And that's a pretty powerful moment that happens, right? Like, instead of thinking about them as just a pure co-pilot, like if they can help you with 80% of what you do, that's pretty helpful, right? That's like almost like an experienced intern that's hanging around your observability team. And that's helpful, right? Because they work all the time. They get paid by watts, right? Instead of salary. So that's a very exciting paradigm.
Is there some tool that already can do that? Like basically when you wake up, then the email draft on its own. I'm pretty sure like some of these like AI tools kind of already do half of that. Like they help you analyze the email and then like help you draft some stuff. But I guess like from the coding perspective, is it hard to build? Or obviously there's like, I guess like there's multiple coding Copilot agents out there, but I heard the accuracy is like not amazing. But like, what are the challenges to build stuff like that? And then is there like existing solution that you're excited about?
Yeah, I think. Look, I think today, and again, I don't have a great sense whether this is model capability or is this constrained by the application, right? Because I think it's partially the model would keep getting better, but in some ways, I don't know if you noticed this, but GPT 4.5 versus GPT 4.0 or versus Claude versus some other models, the English writing part is pretty comparable, right? It wasn't like, okay, GPT-3 to GPT 3.5, the jump is huge, right? Like you went from one generation to the other, and it started writing much better English than before. Now it's pretty comparable. So my theory is a lot of those buildings actually in application building versus just waiting for models to get better, right? Because sometimes it doesn't matter how smart a model is. If you don't have the relevant context, you don't have the relevant workflow, it's really not going to be, it's just not going to be a solve all, right? Some people take this view of like, oh, you now have AI, let's just go build a Salesforce tomorrow. Like, I just don't believe in that future. Selfishly, as we see, like I believe more in the future where the AI is like, more of a co-pilot version versus a full autopilot that just replace all the SaaS application. That's not a future I subscribe to. I believe more in the future of like, how does AI make human more efficient? So there's that component. But I think a lot of times it's really about the application layer you're building out, the workflows that you're building out, right? Like in this example that we're talking about, I was surprised, right? Like again, like Satya did his podcast like a month ago. Okay. So this wasn't like 6 months ago. And we're talking about Microsoft. And his wish list is he wishes there's an email co-pilot that drafts the emails for him, right? And that's, to you and I, this doesn't sound like that hard to do, right? Because what I'm doing today is I just copy and paste something, throw into, OpenAI topic, and I get a response. Why can't that just be ready to go? And I think it just takes application building. Sometimes maybe the emails he's getting, like to our point, hey, there's data security, data governance concerns. Maybe it's contextual reasons, right? If one person is asking him about new products, the other person is asking him about partnership. How do you know what the right answer is, right? Because you need the right context to get solved. So what is the right context? Those are really, really hard problems to solve. And you reflect that email example onto here. This is where things even get a little harder, right? Because a lot of times, some of the domain knowledge of let's say we're on the same team. What I know about our system and what you know about our system, they're not documented, right? So it's not like I just sit down and be like, here are the 10 things I know about our website handler, and here are all the scenarios, right? It's in my mind. And so it's hard to expect an AI to read my mind, right? To be like, oh, got it. This is how Casper would think about it, right? I think it's much easier to expect AI to show up as a very smart intern, but you still need to give them or give this thing context, right? So
for sure. Okay. Hi, Steven. Sorry, I have not seen like the comment section. I wanted to say to the audience. Okay, so okay, since we're closing to the end of this, what are some like new trends that you're seeing in either observability or security space, or just like generally in like, because you come across a lot of like later stage companies, what are something that like people have built that actually are able to scale that you're excited about? That's not on this graph since like the graph has been a while. And
yeah. Gosh, I'm super excited about a lot of things. I think like again, there's a gap between expectation and reality, right? Which is our reality has improved by a lot, right? Since this whatever age of AI, whatever you want to call it, since November 2022. But it's not to people's expectation, right? To what we talk about, right? You almost want some AI to show up and just solve all the problem and be so smart about it. I think one of the things I am very excited about this year, and I'm pretty sure you get this answer all the time too, which is just applications of true agentic capabilities. The way I define agentic capabilities is this agent's multi-hop to the model, right? So what do you mean by multi-hop is single hop is I click ChatGPT, I get an answer back. I fill this out to my application, right? That's today. That's a lot of the AI co-pilots you're seeing, AI chatbots, which is just a single hop to the model, get an answer, and reply back. What if you have a multi-hop model where there's true agentic experience, right? Meaning, I said something to this AI co-pilot, get the answer back from the model, feed this back into my other application system, and then feed this back to the model and then get another answer back, right? Or maybe it's 3 or 4 different hops. And sometimes it involves AI, sometimes it doesn't involve AI, right? It's just a natural workflow query in my database to get the relevant results, right? That's where I think things will be very exciting. And look, I think the reason why we're not there yet, right? There's a lot of issues, there's a lot of problems you need to solve there, right? You need to retain the state of a query. Like, you need to kind of retain like where does, the first hop and the third hop in between, like how do I save the state of this query? Like how do I save like where we are in this query, right? So those are things that we haven't really cracked just yet, in my opinion. And a lot of it is, as much as it's technological breakthrough, I think it's a lot of product building and application building. I think that's, again, it's not. It's more about like coming up with new application architectures. So anyways, I'm super excited about agent, about multi-hop capabilities that we'll have.
Totally. Okay. So I'm literally taking notes like multi-hop. Okay, so last 1 minute fire on. What's your favorite book?
I like Robert Carroll's book on Lyndon Johnson. My favorite volume is Master of the Senate. So talking about President Lyndon B. Johnson in the Senate and how does he position himself in the Senate, and it's 1,000-page volume, so it's a long read, and I really like that book.
Wow. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say probably my parents. I think they believed in me more than I believed myself. And it's always nice to have people who believe more in me than myself. Which again, it's not tangible. Hey, here are the 3 things they've done for me, but I think some of the phone calls and conversations we've had when I'm at my low, those really helped.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Gosh, it's relevant. I would invite Satya. I would have a conversation with him about AI, and agents.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Sorry, what was that? I missed
Where
it.
can we find you outside of work?
Oh, love sports. I love watching sports. So Bay Area sports, Warriors, Niners, and like running. So
Love that. Well, Casper, thank you so much for the masterclass in security and observability AI. It was so interesting to learn from you.
thanks, Grace. I learned a lot from you too. Thank you.
Let me quickly answer